welcome to episode 289 of the CRICKETher Weekly. You will have noticed, if you are watching this on YouTube, that we are not in the same room. I am up in Scotland and will be attending and chairing a panel at a Cricket Scotland Women and Girls Cricket celebration later today. So that's quite exciting. Sid, how is the new house looking?
There are slightly less boxes than there were yesterday, but there are still quite a lot of boxes. Anyone that's ever moved house will empathise.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have done the move. It has happened, and we did not accidentally curse it by talking about it on last week's CRICKETher Weekly. So that's good. Now, Sid, it's the week that we've all been looking forward to.
It is. The new Taylor Swift album is here, and I'm loving it, Raf. Um, there's also been some
Yeah.
cricket apparently, but it's been hard to hear the cricket over the sound of Taylor Swift, to be honest.
Yeah, story of my life. Story of my life, mate. Anyway, this is what happens when you're married to a Swiftie. Yes, the World Cup has started this week, Sid. Um, are there any particular kind of big moments or highlights or trends so far?
I think the key trend is wobble, isn't it? That
Yeah.
everybody's wobbling. England didn't quite wobble, but they almost did. Pakistan
A
wobbled
semi-wobble. Can you have a
wobbled.
semi-wobble?
Well, yeah, Pakistan, kind of wobbled and imploded. South Africa wobbled, and we all know what happened to South Africa. They were bowled out for next to nothing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Australia and India both had their moments as well. They were both, in the region of just over 100 for five. India, I think, were just over 100 for six at one point.
Yeah.
But they both recovered to win their opening games, and I think that's the key to the quality of those sides. I think that England will have been very relieved to have won the toss in their match because it's clearly a nervous moment for all these players of being told this is the biggest event of your career. They're coming to India. They're seeing that they're in the kind of center of the women's cricket universe, and all eyes are on them. And there are a lot of nerves around, and that affects whether you're from Pakistan or India or Australia. That's obviously getting to people. I think that it will calm down, but that's been the theme of the first week for me.
Yeah,
What about you?
there are some really interesting stats by Hypercourse actually about the performance of the kind of middle and lower middle order batting this World Cup cycle as having been kind of one of the markers of the advance of professionalism within women's cricket. But you're absolutely right that what we're seeing is that having a bit of depth in your batting order has been completely crucial this World Cup, and that the two teams who we've both tipped that we think will be in the final, Australia and India, are the ones who have had that top order wobble but have managed to recover because they have that depth. So that seems to be the key differentiating points between the sides who have been successful so far in this World Cup and the sides which haven't, which is really interesting. England, very interestingly, have set out their stall early on this and said we are definitely going to play seven batters in pretty much every single match in this tournament, right?
Yeah, and that kind of itself is interesting. It's kind of indicative of a trend, I suppose. That I remember, years ago, watching England in the sort of the 2000s, and there was always this dilemma of, do they play a seventh batter? Is playing a seventh batter a risk, or do you need to leave yourself, more bowling options? I remember the women's Ashes was in 2013 when Holly Colvin got dropped for Danny Wyatt because Danny Wyatt was perceived to be a better batter, but it was seen as a big risk. You dropped a key bowler of and they only went in with kind of four frontline bowlers in order to play that extra batter because they were nervous. And Danny Wyatt came in and did her usual thing at the time, which was smash it everywhere until she smashed one. Well, she hit it a long way, to be fair, but unfortunately it went straight up in the air and she got caught in about the middle of the pitch. So, but yeah, these days it feels like playing seven batters is the norm. As kind of, I suppose, 50 over cricket gets kind of closer psychologically to 20 over cricket, which maybe is happening even more in the women's game than it is in the men's game, in the sense that it's the same players playing all these things. Whereas in the men's game, obviously, you've got a number of T20 specialists, so your England T20 team looks very different to the ODI team. So yeah,
And I think it's obviously much less of a dilemma if you're an Australia team who just are stacked with all rounders. England very
Yeah,
much
well,
are having to make decisions about batter v bowler because right now we don't really have. I mean, arguably we don't have any genuine all rounders, even including Nat Sciver-Brunt, because she's just so clearly a much better batter than she is bowler. And I am actually a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that she's somehow going to be able to turn herself into an opening bowler in ODIs when she's our most important batter. She's also captaining, and she has had such a lengthy absence from bowling. You almost think that that England are just doing this kind of out of necessity because they've neglected their other potential all-round options. They've pigeonholed Charlie Dean as a bowler. They've pigeonholed Capsey and Dunkley and Lamb as batters, and
probably
then
rightly, to be
they've got
fair,
they've
but
got nowhere to go. Well, probably rightly in the case of Dunkley, but look, Danny Wyatt Hodge would be another example. Why couldn't she have continued bowling while she developed into the sort of world class batter that she is at the moment? So yeah, I think I've said this before, but it just feels like England pigeonhole people and then get desperate and decide that Nat Sciver-Brunt is probably a better bowler than she actually maybe would be considered to be if she was in the pool of Australian all rounders.
yeah, I mean, does she get into the team as a bowler if she can't bat? If she was a number 11 bat, she's not going to get into the team as a bowler, is she? You need to be Lauren Bell good to do that. That's the Nat Simmer thing is kind of really interesting, isn't it? About the bowling, because you spoke to Charlotte Edwards at towards the beginning of the tournament, on the eve of the tournament, didn't you? And Charlotte Edwards was like, "Oh yeah, Nat's ready. She's going to bowl 10 overs, and we're really happy with where she's tracking." And she's going to go for it, and we'll manage her a bit going forward in the tournament. But going to bowl 10 overs. Nat on on the eve of the opening game it was just like, yeah, I'm not going to bowl 10 overs.
It was
And
really odd, wasn't it? Because yeah, so Charlotte Edwards did her press conference on the Wednesday, and I specifically said, "How's Nat tracking with the ball, and is she going to bowl her full allocation?" And Lottie said she's tracking brilliantly, and yes, she's going to bowl her full 10 overs. So I obviously write that for the Guardian. And then, less than 24 hours later, Nat does a press conference where she's clearly asked about the same thing. And as you say, she says, "Oh no, I don't really think I am going to bowl, but we're going to have to manage it really carefully, and I'm definitely not going to bowl 10." And so you're sat there going, what's happened in
yeah, I mean,
that
Charlotte Edwards obviously
24-hour
giving a
period?
giving a diplomatic answer, but
But the
Nat,
diplomatic answer.
Nat unable to give a diplomatic. I mean, it's a good job that there's that Freaky Friday doesn't happen in real life, because if it did, and Nat suddenly became the ambassador to Japan, then she'd be down the Japanese Prime Minister's office going, yeah, that the English, they're trying to mess with your heads with this trade thing. They're trying to mess you over. You've got it. I'm giving away all the state secrets. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so I think that particular conversation, again, it's one of those where you think, well, they must have anticipated being asked about that because it was one of the big talking points before that first match. And obviously, as it transpired, Nat was not required to bowl 10 overs because the whole thing was over in two shakes of a lamb's tail. But yeah, that whole kind of question and the answer could have been handled perhaps slightly more consistently
yeah.
between coach and captain, let's say.
I think
Let's talk
that
about.
Lottie wants to make it so that that other teams didn't get the jump on them about that. So that's that thing of kind of keep your selection secret.
She could, so
But
she could have just
Nat,
said, "Oh, she could have just said, well, we're hoping that she will,
yeah,
but let's just see," or something like that. It felt like it was a very certain answer. Anyway,
yeah. I
let's
do want to
talk
mention one
about.
more thing
Okay,
before
go
we
on.
move on to England. I want to mention one more thing
Yeah.
about Australia's lineup of all rounders. Because there's an interesting question for me. Who was the key player as Australia kind of recovered from what were they 128 for five? Who was the key player there? You see, for me, Ash Gardner scored 115 off 83 balls, but the key player for me was actually Kim Garth. So Kim Garth came in at 9, probably promoted above Alana King to do with the situation. I think King would usually come in ahead of Garth. And we kind of psychologically think of Garth still as a number. I mean, she scored some runs for Ireland back in the day, but I think we do think of her as a sort of number 10, number 11 batter. And yet she came in and scored 38 off 37 balls and was able to kind of give crucial support to Ash Gardner at a point where they were driving to get over that 300 mark and really not just recover from the wobble, but put on a total which New Zealand were unable to chase, even though Sophie Devine went on and scored 100 of her own. So I think that it's really interesting that they don't just bat down. They all rounder down the order, and they all rounder up the order, and all rounders are the key players for Australia. And maybe they've gone some people would argue they've gone a bit too strongly in that all rounder direction. And that eliminates some of the specialists that people would like to see play. But you can't argue with the results when they're able to recover from 128 for 5 to 326.
Yeah, only Australia, hey.
Yeah.
Okay, England, South Africa at the other end of the batting spectrum, Sid. South Africa. I mean, it's interesting because there are lots of spins you could put on this, and one of them is, and certainly has been in some of the English press, is that England were absolutely brilliant, and what on earth were we all worrying about? And this is the start of England's march to a glorious World Cup victory. But you and I obviously sat down and watched this match together, and I think felt generally that England did not produce anything particularly spectacular with the ball. Yes, it was consistent. Yes, it was accurate, but really, it was just South Africa forgetting how to bat.
Yeah, and this was like a once in a lifetime experience, this innings from South Africa. South Africa are not a side that are going to get bowled out for that any time again soon. I mean, now I've said that, they might go and do it, but this is just one of those things that happens in cricket. Where we have seen instances. I mean, South Africa themselves, as I wrote in my piece on the game, South Africa themselves did that to the West Indies in 2017 up at Leicester. And they had the West Indies all out for 50 and then won the game by 10 wickets. So that's not where South Africa are. South Africa are not that batter side. They just had an absolute nightmare on the day, and they had a wobble, and they were unable to recover from it. Really, as soon as Laura Wolfart went, it was like they fell down like dominoes. Snarlo Jafta was the only player to make double figures, but she should have been stumped by Amy Jones when she was still in single figures. So it could have been even worse for South Africa. But they're not going to do that again. And it's not because England had England weren't outstanding. They were fine. They were competent. Lindsay Smith bowled well. It was nice to see Nat Siva-Brunt get back in the wickets. It was all fine. But it wasn't because England's bowlers were suddenly, they're not going to do that to Australia or to India. They're not even if they do that to Pakistan or Sri Lanka or whatever. No, they're not going to. That was a once in a sort of 10 years kind of phenomena, and no one else is going to bat that badly. And South Africa won't bat that badly again. I feel really sure they won't.
And it was actually not a particularly helpful match for England in some ways because they were only out on the field for, well, it was less than 3 hours in total. It didn't really kind of, acclimatise them to World Cup cricket. And it potentially, I mean, you would hope not, and you would hope that they're not reading the positive press any more than they're reading the negative press. But you just hope that it doesn't mean that they get carried away somehow. And it's an old cliche.
And think that they're going to do it every time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And think, oh yeah, we've got this sussed, and we've definitely got a team who are going to win this tournament. So hopefully, Lottie is managing to kind of get beyond that and keep them grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to do that, and I think they probably do know that. There was a really interesting moment when the third wicket went down, when they came into the huddle, and the camera focused on Charlie Dean for a moment, and she just shook her head like, what the hell is going on here? She even with 3 wickets down, she was like, this is mad. We've been gifted this. So hopefully they'll take that forward with them. And it's positive. They've got a great net run rate to start off with, but one of the problems is you have a great net run rate at the start of the tournament. Because of the way that it's calculated, your net run rate is always going to go down now. Well, almost whatever they do, even if they have another win almost as good as this, the net run rate will start to drift downwards. So they're going to be fighting constantly to keep that net run rate up. and that could end up, being important. It's certainly in terms of who you end up playing in a semi-final potentially, particularly after Australia dropped points. I suppose dropped points in inverted commas. Let's put the finger quotes up there because it was only because that match got rained off. But yeah,
But
and in
actually,
terms
there's a
of
lot of talk that more matches could be rained off
yeah,
because apparently we've just hit monsoon season in Sri Lanka, or specifically in Colombo, and therefore it's possible that we could be looking at several more washouts over the next week or so,
yeah, I mean,
and
no one
that could
intended.
mean that net run rate's really critical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no one. This tournament was never designed to be played in Sri Lanka at this time of year, right? They had to find an alternative venue, because they had to find a co-host so that Pakistan could avoid the dilemma of playing in India. We saw last year what happens if you go to the UAE at this time of year because the players were losing significant amounts of weight, leaving the field after a T20 in the UAE. It wasn't
Yeah.
realistic to play ODIs in the UAE at this
No.
time of year. I mean, as it is, the England players were absolute. You could see Amy Jones behind the stumps. She didn't have a great game behind the stumps, and I'm not sure she had a great game with the bat. Really, certainly early doors. She could have wobbled. There was a sort of pre-wobble, but she had sweat pouring down her face. I don't know how she kept her helmet on, to be honest.
No.
I might have been tempted to just go, I'm going to stand back to the spinners because I can't have my helmet on. So yeah, acclimatization crucial. On the other hand, England haven't because they had a shorter game. That doesn't mean it's easier because obviously the heat is absolutely wilting out there. So yeah.
So does that mean
Anyway,
South Africa have an advantage for having only batted
well,
for 20 overs?
potentially.
Um, yeah, and the other kind of interesting aspect about England's selection perhaps was that they preferred both Alice Capsey and Emma Lamb over Danny Wyatt-Hodge, and obviously Sarah Glenn left on the bench as well. Interesting call there. Now, again, a bizarre match that meant that actually Capsey and Lamb had a bit of a thanks for coming because didn't bat, didn't bowl. So what did you make of that selection, Sid?
Well, the selection again, as we kind of hinted at earlier, these selections are being driven by the bowling, right? That they obviously know Nat has admitted that she isn't going to bowl 10 overs, so therefore you have to find other overs from somebody, and therefore if you select both Capsey and Lamb, you've got a few options there. I think that they do pretty much trust Capsey's bowling. I'm not convinced they really trust Emma Lamb's, but they are also going to remain aware that Capsey sometimes people get after her.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no turn in the pitch, she is a kind of a spinning spinner, albeit doesn't spin it a lot. So she's not kind of doing the things that Sarah Glenn or that Sophie Ecclestone do, which is like the huge variations, in pace and bounce and that kind of thing. So Capsey is looking to turn it, but she's not turning it much. If there's no spin in the pitch, Capsey can get carted. And that's so maybe at that point you're going, well, we need an alternative to Capsey as well. Obviously Heather Knight's there, but I'm guessing that they're going with Heather Knight. Well, she's crucial to our batting picture, and they've repeatedly said how important she is to their batting picture. So they don't want to risk.
She's only very freshly recovered from this very, very difficult hamstring injury. If the World Cup had been even sort of 2 or 3 weeks earlier, she wouldn't have made it. So they've got to handle her with kid gloves, I think.
Yeah, so they don't want her bowling, I don't think. And there's certainly not a lot of overs. So yeah, you have to basically go into any match going, well, one of our batters might need to bowl 8 overs here, because we can't depend on that.
Okay.
I think so. I think it is the right call in terms of the selections they've got because, as you said earlier, no all-rounders in the team. So yeah.
Okay. Now, finally, Sid, we are recording this on Sunday morning. India v Pakistan has just got underway over in Colombo. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about this match, not really particularly about the cricket, but actually about the kind of off-field activity or non-activity around it. I'm particularly thinking about handshakes. And I've just had a quick look, and it looks like the captains did not shake hands at the toss. So we don't know what's going to happen later. We don't know what's going to happen with the overall match at the time of recording. But that's not massively promising, and it does suggest, unfortunately, that the politics that we've seen in the men's game are seeping into the women's game.
Yeah, and that's a pity. I mean, I don't think I can put this stuff much better than Richard did on the Naughty Child podcast. So, maybe you should go and listen to that instead, and listen to the last sort of 10 minutes of the last episode on that. It it would just be nice to think that we can put this politics aside and show that that there are friendships there, because we know that there are these people don't hate each other. That they've got on in the past, and it's just really sad that politics means that they're having to kind of sort of symbolically pretend to hate each other,
Yeah.
and it's almost like they're required to disrespect each other, and that doesn't feel like cricket to me.
It's becomes the women's game becomes a stage show whereby bad actors in politics and in kind of the men's cricket setup can have that it's almost like kind of Harmanpreet Kaur is a puppet, and the men are over the top of her pulling the strings, Pinocchio-esque. And that's really unfortunate. I think it does say something though about the overall status of women's cricket within India, and I guess not just necessarily India but globally, because we still have the women's players in a situation where they don't feel able to have the autonomy to say, well, that's just not something that that Harmanpreet Kaur did not feel able to say, well, actually, I don't have any beef with the Pakistan women's team, so I'm gonna shake her hand. And that's so I think for me it's partly about kind of actually when it comes to the realities of the situation, we can talk all we like about how this World Cup is a brilliant opportunity and a showcase for how far the women's game has advanced, but it's still men pulling the strings and calling
Yeah,
the shots.
yeah. As I said, I think it's a pity, and I think that we can do better, and I would hope that cricket will try and do better in the future. But at the moment, politics is taking the upper hand, and yeah,
All right. Well, thanks, Sid. Looking forward to another week of the World Cup. And yeah, we will be seeing you in a week's time. Bye for
yeah.
now.
Bye.